So hi folks, welcome to the first in a series of very short coffee break interviews with authors, chats with authors, although I feel like today's chat is possibly going to become a lunch break chat given the topic that we're going to talk about. So it's my absolute pleasure today to talk with author James Rosone. James, first up, why don't you tell us who you are, what you're known for, etc.
Sure. So my name is James Rosone. I live in Apollo Beach, Florida, which is just south of Tampa. So I'm on the West Coast. I'm known for writing military and espionage techno thrillers. Is what I'm predominantly known for. I have a slight bent for sci-fi, and so I have a sci-fi series that I've been typically writing about 2 to 3 books a year in that genre, and just enjoy it as a break from the heavy, intensive research that's done in the techno thriller world. So I've been a writer now for 7 years. I've been a full-time writer though for 4. So this is my full-time job. I work. The only way I make my money is writing books.
Living the dream.
Living the dream.
It's fantastic. Well, one of the things we've chatted about a little bit, I've certainly been following some of your other videos on this topic, is that you're very open and on record about your experience as an interrogator in Iraq, but also your experiences with PTSD and anxiety. And anxiety is certainly something that I'm unfortunately quite familiar with myself, and I think, up to a third of the population are most of the time. So just thinking about, as writers, it's really important, I think, to get these things right. Thinking about TV shows, books that you've read, movies, are there stereotypes or misconceptions around trauma and anxiety that you think these need to be dispelled?
If I had to pick a stereotype, I would think one of the big ones is that people seem to view people who have PTSD or suffer from anxiety or depression as being broken, or that they're dangerous, or there's some sort of issue. And it's really not the case. What happens is someone has been exposed to some sort of violent activity, or something that just a traumatic experience that happened. It could be a car accident, it could be a rape, it could be, it could be war. And the brain sometimes has a hard time processing that trauma and what happened. And that causes, it causes a chemical imbalance in the brain. And when there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, if it's untreated, then it's going to continue to metastasize and cause problems, behavioral problems, whether it's anxiety, weight gain because you're always stressed, and you eat because you're stressed, or something along those lines. You're going to end up acting out in some fashion. And I think one of the stereotypes is people see these behaviors and they just think that, well, this is just a bad person, or they're a broken person. They're really not. This is a person who is just struggling internally, trying to hold it together. And if they were shown a different way, shown some more help, then maybe they might be able to find that help and be able to find that balance and be able to return back potentially to where they were before the trauma.
Yeah. Most of us are just doing the best we can. It's like some of the things that frustrate me. Occasionally you see a character depicted as completely non-functional, just coming back to something you're saying. It's almost like they've given in, and there's that feeling that this person's just given in to their mental illness or the depression or whatever it is. Whereas, as you say, in reality, people generally don't give in to it. They want to beat the thing. They want to have a quality of life. But yeah, are you comfortable talking about the roots of your own PTSD?
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, most of mine stems from the Iraq War and what we were doing and what I was specifically involved in and how that worked. I mean, for the people who don't know, I was a military interrogator. So I was I joined the Army initially, and I was with the Army for 6 years. And I got out and I went over to the Air Force of all services. And so it was in the Air Force that I actually became a military interrogator, though. And after going through about 6.5 months of training in that profession and really, really getting good at it through the school, it became time to put the education to work. And when we were in Iraq, our job was predominantly to interrogate the high value targets that were being captured. So when various Al-Qaeda operatives or leaders would be snatched up by, whether it's an infantry unit or a special forces unit or even a SEAL or Delta team, they'd end up in your detention facility, and you have to go through the process of trying to convince these guys to talk. And that is not an easy job with the rules and stuff that we were constrained with and what we had to do. And at the same time, you're dealing with horrible, horrible people. These are terrorists. These are people who have planted bombs in markets and blowing up innocent people. They're not even like hitting military targets. And they relish that kind of stuff, or they're chopping heads off people, or they're just dismembering people. I mean, just they're really bad people. And you see all of the intelligence and the images and the videos of the stuff they're involved with and doing. And then you're also having the stuff that they've either that's been captured on them, or the information we have. And then you got to go in and talk to these guys and try to.
So some of what you're seeing is actual video of them carrying out some of these.
We had sources that were recruited working for us in villages and cities, and typically Iraqi cops who would provide a lot of the good intel of what's going on and who's who and so on. If the Al-Qaeda guys knew they were working for them, or if the Jaish al-Mahdi, which were the Shia groups for Muqtada al-Sadr's army, if they knew they were working and narking to the Americans, a lot of times these guys would get captured and they get their heads cut off. They do it very publicly. They'll line up 4 or 5 of the guys they capture in the middle of the market where everyone could see, and they'll be out there shouting and whatever, and they'll just saw their heads right off, and then kick them around like a football. And it's a warning to everyone in the community. This is what happens when you collaborate with the Americans. And it sends a chilling effect in the area, because then the community is like, well, I want to help, but I don't want to get my head cut off.
Yeah.
And
which is
then
completely
how do we learn
understandable.
what's going on in the area? Yeah, but you're seeing this. It's like, these are guys you actually, in some cases you knew these guys. And that's really tough, because now you have the guy who did it, and you can't just go in there and beat the guy. I mean, it's against the law and the rules, but you have to figure out, how am I going to get this guy to give up information so we can go capture, kill his buddies, and that's really tricky, really hard to do.
Do you find that, or did you find in that situation that you were having to kind of compartmentalize a lot of things? You were kind of pushing down your own reaction to it.
You have to detach it. Yeah, you got to become very detached from your own emotions and feelings to do that, because at the same point, as bad and evil as this particular guy is, you've got sometimes 2 to 4 other guys you have to interrogate that are very similar to him in the same day, and you're doing that every single day. So you're doing this 12, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week with no breaks. And then on top of all that, you're still getting rocketed and mortared attacks on your base, and you're having to live and deal with that. And you can walk into the chow hall to go get lunch or go get breakfast, and a mortar can end up hitting not far away, and a couple of guys end up getting blown up or get a leg ripped off or something. I mean, that's your daily thing you have to live with. So
and you don't know when it's coming.
You get all this other crap you got to deal with too. You get quite nerve rattling.
Can't even imagine what it's like. What as an interrogator, what do you think you learned about human beings? Given that you're dealing with very different human beings in most cases.
You learn a lot about human beings. One, you learn about the utter depravity of human beings and what they can do. You also learn that people will find a way to rationalize evil things very easily. They'll find a way to justify it and rationalize what they're doing as justice and right. And then when you also think about it, sometimes if you really, really look at it, there's a fine line between you and them. Like what you're doing, what your actions are, or the military are in comparison to what they are doing. And in a way, there's not a lot of difference between like you versus them if the role was reversed. So for instance, if our country was invaded, we would likely be doing similar things to them that they're doing to us. Yeah. I don't think we would be dismembering people. I know I wouldn't be participating in that, but I do know I would be definitely, involved in running a lot of the same type of, hit and run attacks or IEDs and different types of things that they ran on us, because it's a very effective tool and means of harassing an adversary. Yeah. you know,
So at the time we're recording this, we've got the Ukraine versus Russia thing happening. So, you know, the Ukrainians, I guess, are in that position of
they are,
trying to
you know,
resist.
it's very tough, you know, so everyone talks about, you know, whether this is a war crime or that's a war crime. I'm not going to say that what Putin's doing in Ukraine isn't a war crime, because a lot of it probably is. But it could also be, it also is very valid to say that what a lot of the Ukrainians are doing is also war crimes. You know, there was a doctor, a Ukrainian doctor, who was talking on, you know, a Ukrainian TV station, like I think it was like 3 or 4 days ago, talking about how he's ordered his own, you know, his own medical people, when they capture Russian soldiers, to, you know, to castrate them, to cut off their genitals. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, why would you ever say that on public TV to begin with? Because you're just going to fuel Russian propaganda and do that. And second of all, you know, these are war crimes that you're talking about doing. It's against the Geneva Conventions, and you're trying to portray yourselves as the good guys. This is not a good thing to portray and do. And the only reason I bring that up is because we seem to forget that in war is about killing and ending the war as quickly as you can. And there are, unfortunately, horrible things that happen on all sides. It's not to excuse one side or the other, or to justify one side or the other. It is a cold reminder that these things happen, regardless of what we think or what we believe should happen. They do happen. And we have to acknowledge that it's happening, and then just work to find a peaceful resolution to it as quickly as you can, you know?
So you're obviously, just from what you're saying and from other, you know, videos I've watched, interviews with you, you're obviously, you know, a gentleman with a lot of empathy, and particularly that ability you have to empathize with people who are very different to you. Do you find that helps you kind of not color in some characters in your books as just two-dimensional cardboard cutout black hat people, or do you?
I think so. I like to make the characters as real as possible. And you can't make a character real if you're not willing to get into the head of the character that it is you're trying to portray. Yeah. And I don't think you should try to portray your protagonist or your adversary as just a one-dimensional, two-dimensional cardboard character where they're just irrational all the time. And now, if that is how you want the character to be perceived, as an irrational actor all the time, then that is one thing, but that's a design of the character to be done that way. That shouldn't be the standard operating procedure, though, for all your characters, because it's not real. And so it's a matter of, is this book supposed to be like real, like have some realism to it, where you go and you go, oh my God, this thing is so cool, it's so good, my heart's racing, my hands are sweating because it's so intense. Or is this supposed to be a much more lighthearted affair, and doesn't quite as matter as much about that realism, that grittiness to it? You know, I'd say another author who writes really gritty action scenes like we do, and he maybe goes a little more in depth in it than we do in some aspects, would be Jason Casper. He's another military vet that I've known since he first got into writing too, and he writes really good you know, characters and action scenes with his stuff and what he does. But you know, that's how you make a good book. That's how you make a compelling story, is when people are drawn into it and go, oh my God, I totally could see this happening, or oh yes, I'm seeing this play out right now in XYZ.
Yeah, I find a lot of people find antagonists or villains who do have a good rationale for what they're doing. You know, they're not people who are using it as justification for it, but they actually have a good reason. So even just characters like the Vulture on one of the Spider-Man movies, the fact that you know, he's this beaten down guy who's just trying to make a living, and the system's against him, and you kind of go, yeah, I get where this guy's coming from. I might not agree with what he's doing, but
it was like the Joker. You know, remember watching the Joker, and you had that character, and he's a brutal dude. He's a horrible dude. What he does is horrible, but you kind of see where he's coming from with it all. And like, I mean, he's a horrible dude. You know, Stephen King's a master of doing that too. He makes these just terrifying stories and scenarios and what's going on, but they make for incredible books, incredible like suspenseful books. And he's had a number of them turned into films and in movies and TV shows and things like that. And it's because they're able to draw people in. They're able to keep you in there and whatnot.
How about your experience and your knowledge of PTSD. Has that influenced characters that you've written, situations, scenes that you've written in
I
books?
tried to. Yeah, no, I've definitely tried to. So when I'm creating a military character, so I've got if I have an army person, whether it's a soldier or a woman involved, I try to write in some of that emotional feeling that they're in, when a battle has happened and a friend or two has been killed, that visceral feeling they feel at the end of the battle when they turn around and they see that their friend that was just there is just, their face is smashed in from being hit with a round. I mean, those are emotions that everyone is going to feel in that situation. And I think being able to portray those emotions is really helpful for the reader, because they see it and they're like, wow, that's insane. That's super intense, and like I've ridden in armored vehicles in Iraq and flown in helicopters where our vehicle is getting hit and you've got, rounds dinging off the sides of it. And you're in this thing, the whole time you're in this thing, you're like, please God, don't let my vehicle get blown up by an IED or an EFP and, get terribly injured. And when you're able to put that pucker factor in, like, you really know what that guy's feeling in that character, you really know what he's feeling because you felt that. And when you can
what
put
is
that
happening?
in,
So the pucker factor, I like that. What else is happening to your body in that situation, though? And what's going
man,
through your mind?
first, you're hyper vigilant. I mean, hyper freaking vigilant. You are looking for every possible thing that could possibly be a bomb or something that could hurt you. You're looking for every possible threat, hand movements, objects that don't look normal. You're watching windows, you're watching sides of the roads, you're watching for trash on the sides of the road. You're watching to see if there's if the road has got any fresh pavement or fresh asphalt or something along those lines, because it's an indicator of something that could have been buried recently, the night before, and set up so when you drive over it detonates.
Yeah.
All of those kinds of things like that, or people who will speed up really fast in front, behind you to try and cut in front of you. Well, they'll do that sometimes to try to speed up next to the convoy to either detonate a car bomb or get in front and stop and then detonate a bomb and block you guys, and you're blocked in and the ambush happens.
Yeah.
So you think about that, you see that stuff, and then when you come home, you start experiencing some of that stuff because you see it happening around you, and it's hard to sometimes remember this is Florida. That Toyota is not a car bomb, things like that.
It's just imprinted so much on your reactions.
It can be. So for me, what really imprinted on for me is smell. So when I worked in the prison camp, okay, I got 5,500 prisoners in my camp, and 5,500, prisoners are there, and they smell. I'm sorry, but it's out there sweltering in the heat, and it stinks. And when you got trash from 5,500 people, the food waste, the porta-johns, just the smell of it all. So for me, when I smell certain things, for me, that is more of a trigger. Like a baby's diaper, brings you back to just smelling the porta-johns of the camp. Walking through in an alleyway in a city, or near an alleyway, or near trash cans, and you smell that trash, that decaying trash, is just like a flashback or a smell that brings you back to, the camps, and dealing with that and being around that stuff. And so,
and do you mind me asking what happens to you in that? Because people experience PTSD. And
better now than it used to be, that's for sure. A lot of times back then, it would just, your heart rate spikes again. You become hyper vigilant instantly. You're just very sensitive to what's happening and what's going on around you. And it's a little harder to wind down, so to speak. You're out with people. And like when I was in Chicago, before I got into writing full time, I was working as a cyber risk insurance broker for Aon Insurance. I was a VP with them. And we'd be out with some different clients or people, and go on our way to a restaurant. We're downtown Chicago, and you smell the trash all of a sudden as you're walking out of an alleyway nearby, and you smell that and just, your mind goes back to the camp. And then, a few seconds later, they're asking you a question about work, and now you're back in the here and now, but that memory of the camp kind of lingers, and it kind of affects the rest of the evening and what you're trying to do. Or at least for the next little while it does.
Yeah.
So you go through some of that. Now it's gotten better over time. I think, we talked about some of the different treatment options and things. There's over time, I've learned about that stellate ganglion block injections, SGB injections, where they do a nerve block in the neck, and the two stellate ganglion nerves in the neck. That really helps with controlling the mind's. So the brain will send a message, a trigger down to the body to respond. But when they blocked that stellate nerve in your neck, there's two of them, one on either side. When they block that, it interrupts that message. So the brain gets triggered, but the body doesn't. And so that's really helpful.
It stops it from the message.
Stops it from hitting. Yeah, your heart doesn't start beating. You don't dump your your adrenaline, and so it kind of causes a little bit of a reset. But that only addresses the body. It doesn't address the mind. And for me, I didn't find out about this till 2 years later. Then is when I found out about the ketamine treatments, and you can do that as an IV or oral. I would recommend the IV first. Do that, and then if you want to do it long term, then go with the oral ketamine, because it's a little cheaper to go that route. But that's incredible. You're down for 20 to 30 minutes, but it's going to feel like you've been down for days or weeks. And
is that's a reset as well?
Yeah. So what that's doing, the ketamine is actually helping to heal and reset the nerve receptors in the brain. And unbeknownst to me, this is a drug, a non-opioid drug that they've been using in like depression and anxiety for, like 40 some odd years. So there's a lot of history behind this and doing it, but they've only recently been studying and using this probably in the last 10, maybe 15 years for PTSD. And it still hasn't been widely made available or known or talked about, yet. It's maybe only in the last probably 3 or 4 years that more veterans are finding out about it and talking about it and starting to know about it.
And it's interesting because the US often leads, and Australia, where I am, is often a few years behind. And my day job is every couple of weeks I'm running a training course, usually with people who either have some form of mental illness, but or they're on the autism spectrum, or they're young people. But a lot of my students have trauma, so they're suffering PTSD. And that is just knowing that and learning some things has shaped the way I create a classroom environment for people to make it safe. But these are treatments, usually I'm listening to what, clinicians and therapists are talking about. I've never heard of this before. So having watched a couple of your interviews, it's something that I definitely urge people to have a look at.
There's a lot of dual use drugs. Ketamine has historically been a horse tranquilizer, but it also has an incredible effect on mental illness and being able to handle depression, anxiety, in dealing with some of the PTSD symptoms. Because at the end of the day, it's about repairing the brain, the neuroreceptors in the brain that have experienced the trauma, and trying to reconnect that and help the brain to kind of heal. And this is a treatment that does help. It's non-habit forming, and it's not a terribly expensive treatment, depending upon where you go and what you do for it. But it has incredible side, incredible effects to it and what it does for helping you. So, it depends on how you take it. It can be a disturbing drug if it depending on the type of, who gives it to you and in dosing levels. I'm very fortunate that the doctor I've used in Tampa, he uses a benzodiazepine is what he gives you beforehand, which is kind of like a happy drug, like Adderall or Ativan or something like that. Not Adderall, but Ativan. So it kind of makes you, really happy, so to speak. And then when he gives you the ketamine, because ketamine is a hallucinogenic drug. So
this is a clinical therapy we're talking about, not just a home hobby.
No. So you give it to you, and then you go like instantly, because it's IV. Instantly, you're down. But because he's giving you the benzodiazepine beforehand, you're in a happy state. So when you go into this trance, this the stage, you're going in happy, which is very critical, because depending on what your mindset is before you start, it could be very bad too.
Okay, I
bad,
understand.
so you need to make sure the mind is in the right place when you do this stuff. So when I've done the oral ketamine at home, one of the things I'll do is I make sure to get myself in good mental state. I'll listen to some. I'm a Christian, so I'll listen to some praise and worship music when I take the medicine, and for me, it just puts in a good mind in a good happy spot. I'm listening to good Christian music. I'm going into this thing. So when I'm in the down the rabbit hole, so to speak, I'm hearing that the whole time, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, that's amazing. So a few minutes ago, you really took me inside, being inside a Humvee with bullets pinging off the sides. When you're writing that, is that another form of therapy for you? Is that?
Yeah, in a way, I think it is. I won't lie and say I don't get real sometimes get anxious writing these things and doing that. I can and do sometimes, but it's also very real and visceral. And I think it's one of those things where, like in cognitive processing therapy or CPT, that's one treatment the VA does do a lot of. Really brutal and hard to do at first, especially if you don't do some like SGB or ketamine treatments in advance. But what that is it's about writing out the incidents, writing out what happened, writing out the trauma over and over and over again, and doing that with every one of the traumatic events. And part of what that's doing is it's desensitizing you. It's getting it out of your system. It's showing you, you're able to write it. You write it over and over and over again. And then at the end of the day, really what it comes down to is you have to look at the situation and say, okay, I did everything I was supposed to do. People still died. Well, what you have to remember is no matter what you do, the enemy will always have a vote in the situation. And if they choose to fight back in that instance, then that's something that's out of your control. And if they fight back and someone gets killed, that's not because you screwed up something. The enemy responded to your guys' actions. And that's what ultimately led to their death, not the fact that you failed to do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
They have a vote, and you don't get a say in that. And if you can't accept that, and it took me years, like a decade, to get to the point where I could accept that fact, you're going to struggle with that. You're always going to live with the regret of it.
But that was a decade of working through things like CBT and writing out these situations, or was that just a chunk of it?
It was a big chunk of that, just coming to that conclusion, finally knowing you need to do it, knowing you need to accept it, and actually accepting it are two different things. You may know this is what you have to do, but it may take you a long time to get there. And so that was part of it. Was just at some point I just had to get there and say, all right, look, it really sucks. These situations happen, and it does. I talk about a few of them, and in particular a lot. But at the end of the day, I did what I was supposed to do. And the enemy responded in a way that, caused people to die. And that's not my fault. But it doesn't mean it doesn't sting or it doesn't still hurt. It just means I'm not the one at fault for it. And that's what you have to accept. You have to learn to live with it.
And you now you mentor some other writers who are vets as well, I believe. And is that also helping them work through some of these issues and memories?
Immensely. Yeah. One of the guys I've been mentoring with, he writes helicopter books from Vietnam. He was a helicopter pilot in the war there, and he spent 3 years in Vietnam flying helicopter combat missions and whatnot. And so for him, it's been very helpful to write out all those stories, tell the stories of the different operations and the men that served in them, and the ones that died, the ones that made it home, and the bravery of some of these different pilots and what went on. And he's reconnected with just hundreds of people that he hasn't heard from in 50 years from these books, and it's just incredible. And now it's a great piece for him. One, he's making good money selling it. It's a new, he's 70, now he's 74 and he's still continuing to write these things. So it's given him a new lease on life, so to speak, because now he's got a new purpose and mission and he's loving it, connecting with all kinds of people. His kids and his grandkids can now read about his experiences and what he did and participated in. And it'll always be there. So it's very neat. It's very neat to see that happen. And I'm excited to kind of see that replicate with the other 3 guys that we're working with now.
Yeah, but he's had to wait a long time
He did,
process
and
that.
he'll tell you his biggest challenge was, he was in the Army for 30 years for one. So he retired as a colonel. He was in the Army for 30 years, and then he went to work full time, doing another job. And it wasn't until he retired from his second career, and moved down here to Florida to retire, that the PTSD and everything started to hit him, started kicking, slowed down, and it hit him. Yeah. And at the time, he was one of my beta readers and was helping me write, some particular scenes and do that. And then when I moved here, we met up for lunch and he was telling me about, his idea and what he wanted to do. And I was encouraging, well, why don't you go ahead and do that? I'll link you up with my editor, my cover designer, and we'll help you get this stuff going. And so, 9 months later, he has his first book and starts doing it and puts it out. And then a lot of people like it and they want him to start writing more. And like, well, why don't you tell about this story? Why don't you tell about this story? And so he started writing books from about all these other campaigns and actions that happened from all these other pilots that started contacting him. And it's turned into this really cool series that he has of operations that have taken place for like the last 3 or 4 years of the Vietnam War. It's really neat.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And as you said, like his family can read about this and talk about this with him now too. My great uncle, one of my mum's uncles, served in World War II in the South Pacific, and he was, all I know about his service was that he was on a very small island, him and another fellow, and they were just stuck there. And, if you've been in these jungle islands, I've been to Fiji, and as soon as you walk off the path, it's just plants, just vegetation. And he lived in that for a couple of years with having to live off the land. But there was always this thing of don't talk to him, don't bring it up, don't even mention World War II or the Japanese or any of those topics. And often, now that I'm getting older, I'm kind of thinking, man, I wonder how many opportunities he missed for debriefing and talking through, but even just sharing some of his experiences with us too, because he's a guy that I respected so much for his service, but never got to tell him that too, which was really sad. But interesting. But that's fantastic. A couple of other questions, then we might wrap this up, James. I really appreciate your time today. Penultimate question. How do our armed forces handle well-being of their staff, of the service people? And is there something you think they need to do differently?
Yeah, so in the US, they don't handle it very good at all. And part of the problem stems from our security clearance process. So most jobs in our military require at least a secret security clearance, and then there's a fair number that require a top secret clearance. And the challenge is, well, our security clearances have to be renewed every certain number of years. And an issue is there's questions on the security clearance that specifically ask about mental health and whether or not you're seeing anyone or have seen anyone about this. And that can indicate a red flag or a potential, you're not trustworthy type thing. And so those kinds of things have hindered people from coming forward to seek help or get help that they may need. And then commanders, when you go to see someone, your commander is notified that you've gone to see, a psychiatrist, or you've gone to see someone from behavioral health, and that gets flagged in your personnel file. And so these kinds of things can be career enders for a service member. They can affect your promotion ability and your reenlistment ability. So unfortunately, a lot of people will not go see anyone, or if they do, they will sneak off and see someone off base where they can hide it. And that's kind of a problem, because then you can't actually get things addressed and dealt with, because you're going to be penalized if you do. And I think they're trying to get better about doing that right now, but I don't know that they have fixed it enough. There's still too much of a stigma inside the military that if you don't do this, you're just weak. You're not strong. You're not, the person you're supposed to be.
Which is possibly a universal problem, I would be guessing. Yeah.
But it's really bad in the military because you're supposed to be a soldier. You're supposed to be, tough as nails and not supposed.
And you signed up for a dangerous job, so get on with it, kind of thing. Can that be turned around? You think that's like a thing that has to be changed over generations, or can it be addressed quickly?
I think it can be turned around if the military leadership and the senior officer corps and the senior NCO corps can beat that change into the junior and mid-level officers and NCOs that, this has to happen. So let's start addressing this and let's start fixing this. But they need to come up with a really good plan. Like when I came home from Iraq, I've been gone for 556 days. My last day in Iraq, I'm getting on a plane in like less than, 7 or 8 hours, and we're getting the crap bombed out of us in our base. It's the last day of Ramadan, they're just bombing the hell out of us. So I'm sitting here and we're getting just all these rockets and mortars just hitting our base and all these explosions. And I'm like, man, I'm like 7 or 8 hours from getting on a plane out of this place. I don't want to die my last freaking day I'm here. And we leave, we go down to Kuwait. We're in Kuwait for like, I think it was maybe 48 hours. And then I'm on a plane to Baltimore. I spend one night there, and then I'm back home in Tampa, Florida. And here I am, basically 96 hours after getting the crap bombed out of me in Iraq. And 96 hours later, I'm walking around a mall in Tampa. I mean, how did your
brain? It must have been surreal,
yeah, like how does the brain compute that? How do you rationalize that kind of thing? What they should do is when you're coming out of theater like that, is these guys should go to some kind of a place where they can spend a full week or two and just kind of decompress from that, come off of that adrenaline, come off of that hypervigilance high like that, talk to someone. Have them go through and talk to someone. Heck, I would encourage the military to just say, you're going to get this, and just have them do an SGB injection and at least give them that. And then, make other therapies like this available for people. So if they feel they need it, you go and you do it, and then you're back operational and you're ready to go back to war again. But leaving people broke and unable to talk about or seek treatment is only going to make it worse. When they deploy again, you're setting them up to make more mistakes.
There's a cycle happening.
You're also setting up to become worse and compound. And so that's not doing anyone any good, because we spend an enormous amount of money training people for high stress jobs. And we want to retain these people and keep them in and get 10 or 20 years out of them, not burn them out in a 4 or 6 year period and they're useless, and then kick into the curb and get the next person.
Maybe if it was seen as a business, they would see those people as the talent that needs to be looked after. As you're talking, it kind of in a weird way reminds me of one of those last scenes in Tom Hanks's Castaway, where he's suddenly back, in the real world again, and there's this feast of food and people are talking about things, but he's kind of alone in that. He can't really relate to anything because his experience for years has been so different, and he's such a different person. There's no kind of process, as you say, to re-enter a different world again and acclimatize.
I mean, that's probably the biggest challenge we have right now, because like in World War II, when the soldiers were coming home, they didn't largely fly home. It wasn't like that. They boarded transports and ships, and they had, what was it, a 10 or 14-day journey across the Atlantic or the Pacific to get back to the land. And then from there, they would have to go through another processing place and either get discharged or go through another processing aspect before they would eventually be allowed to go back home. So there was weeks, if not months, of decompression. When the war ended, these guys, a lot of them were on occupation duty and staying there, and And even like the movie Band of Brothers, and they're talking with these guys from Easy Company, they had been there for what was it, like 4 or 5 months before they eventually demobilized and went home. And that was a lot of time to decompress. It's not to say
Wind
they didn't,
down.
but it was better than what we're doing now. We're just sending people from the war right back home.
Yeah.
That is not
96 hours. That's really fast.
not a good
Really
process.
fast. Yeah. One last question for you. So there will definitely be a lot of writers watching this at some point. Is there a book you would recommend to other writers, or is there a writing prompt you would like to give them?
Well, if you can, I would definitely join Mark Dawson's self-publishing formula group. Hands down, that's the best closed community that you're going to be able to join. It costs money to join that, but inside there is a lot of full-time legitimate authors who make good money in this business. If you're a new writer, like anything, you want to find mentors that can help you out, but you want to find people who are really successful in this field. If you're striving to be a six-figure writer, then find other six-figure writers and figure out what it is they're doing. If you're a six-figure writer, find the seven-figure writers and figure out what they're doing and try to move it up, because each level, each notch, it's a different level of commitment and dedication. It's a different strategy involved to move between levels. And so you need to associate and have mentors in those different levels who can help pull you up into them. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard for you to figure that out and do that on your own. As far as a book wise, the Bestseller Code by Matthew Jocker and Jody Archer is hands down the best book you're going to find, because if you don't understand the science behind what is going to make a book a bestseller, understanding the writer beats and the story pacing and the arcs and whatnot, if you don't understand that, then it's going to be very hard to create a book that people actually want to read. Right? You got to understand what is the market willing to pay. You are producing a product, and a lot of people are, well, I just want to produce my art. I just want to produce, what's in my heart. That's all fine and dandy if what you're producing is what people want to pay for. If they're not, then you have to figure out, well, how can I produce something that people want to pay for while still being a passion of mine? And they don't have to be mutually exclusive. I love what I'm doing, and we make very good money at it. But it didn't happen overnight. This is I'm 7.5 years into this journey and process. It's been a lot of work. Even this far into it, I work almost 7 days a week, most of the time. I work 10 to 12 hours a day. I work a lot because I wear a lot of hats and I have a lot of jobs to do. And, marketing takes up at least 20 hours of my week is handling the marketing aspects, let alone research and writing. So yeah, I never work 40 hours in a week. That would be like a week off for me to do 40 hours. But at the same time, I'm building a business. And I'm building a business that's going to be seven figures very shortly here on a consistent basis. And that's my goal, because I don't want to be working quite this hard in 3 or 4 more years. But that means I have to build a very big audience that rabid audience that will buy anything I write before I can hit that point. And then I can drop down to a slightly slower pace where I'm producing maybe a little bit of a more complicated book or onion, so to speak, because I've got a lot more time to put into it than what I'm currently doing.
Yeah.
So it's about strategy. What do you want to do? You got to look at that 3, 5, 7 year outlook and say, where do I want to be? And then what am I going to do to get there? What sacrifice am I willing to make to get there? Because you're no longer an employee. You are the job owner. You are the creator. But that means you have all the responsibility. Everything's on your shoulders.
So if you don't do it, it don't happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you are in control of your own destiny at this point. If you put in the work, you study the science, you study the craft, you study the science of it all, and you really work at this thing. There really is no cap to what you can earn, but it takes effort, it takes timing, and a lot of work. And that's something that a lot of people have a hard time with. They're willing to work very hard for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months. But are you willing to work that level of activity for 2, 3, 4 consistent years that it takes to reach that level? If you talk to any tech startup, they're going to tell you they were working 80 to 100 hours a week for years to get where they are. Elon Musk right now, the richest man in the world, more than $250 billion a year, lives in a $40,000 tiny home on his property of his factory at both places.
Really?
He works 50 hours a week at Tesla, 50 hours a week at SpaceX. He's got $250 billion and he lives in a freaking tiny home, not a palatial palace.
Yeah.
He hardly takes a day off.
That's
The
an
guy's
amazing reality check, I think, for
but
all of us.
he has a vision. He has a vision for where he wants these companies and where he wants to be. And he is working relentlessly towards that vision, towards that goal. And he's not resting on his laurels and saying, well, I have all this money, I can just sit back and do nothing. He's like, no, he doesn't care about the money. He cares about where he's going. And where he is going is establishing a sustainable colony on Mars. And that's not an easy thing to do. So everything he does is striving to put it in there. So if you can look at your writing business from that lens, from that perspective, you are going to be a huge success if you can implement a similar strategy. I'm not saying you do the same thing, but put that level of focus and effort on your business. You're going to hit similar types of success.
That's fantastic advice. I really appreciate you sharing that. And because you are so busy, I doubly appreciate your time today, James.
No, I don't want to. I mean, I need to get out and talk to people and do more things. Sometimes I get so focused on my own stuff I'm doing and I forget. And so it's good to be able to talk with other
screens
folks.
and words a lot of the time. Yeah.
I know, right? Well, I usually attend at least one conference a year. The one I predominantly go to is the NINC one, the Novels Incorporated. That's over in St. Petersburg. So for me, it's local because I can just drive over. It's not very far. Although I'll be at the 20 Books conference this year. It'll be my first time going to a conference outside of NINC in quite a number of years. So
nice. When's the 20 Books?
It's in November.
November.
It's in November. It's a weekend. It's a week right before Thanksgiving holiday in our country. So I think it's third week of November is that particular one in Vegas. So yeah.
Well, people watching this in the US, or if you're heading to the US for that conference, go and find James, look him up when you get there.
Yeah.
James, I really want to thank you again for talking with us today. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Got any questions? Feel free to hit me up on Facebook.
Thank you.